K-12 teachers of Reddit. What is a story of a student you had who went on to surprise you with how much they later succeeded or failed in life? Johnny Depp went to my high school, way before I did, but the chemistry teacher was the same guy, but much older by the time I got there. He'd always tell us how Johnny was always skipping school, didn't do well academically and played guitar in the halls. His mom was supposedly always being called. Not my story, but my grandma's. She was a middle school English teacher and had this one student who was problematic. He was well known as a troublemaker and a bully. My grandma was a pretty strict teacher, so she didn't take his crap. She had to take disciplinary actions on multiple occasions, so it's safe to say he was not a fan of her. But my grandma was always able to see his potential, and she didn't want him to waste his life. Flash forward about 35 or 40 years. This student got a hold of my grandma's email address and contacted her. In the email he stated how he has had a very troubled life and had past problems with the law. He then said that he remembered back to her English class and how she was the only teacher who ever pushed him to be a better student and person. It ended up that those memories gave him motivation to turn his life around. He cleaned up his life and was able to get and hold a job. He wanted to thank my grandma for being the only person who ever believed in him and pushed him to be a better person. It definitely made my grandma happy to know that even if it was decades later, she was able to help give someone self-worth and a second chance at life. This is why having competent teachers matters. I had a student come mid-year to my 8th grade class because she was in the US for medical treatment following an awful pickup accident in her country where she was dragged down the road. She lost most of one leg and the other from the knee down. Her first week she came in a wheelchair and became very popular since only she and a helper could use the school elevator. The rest of the year she graduated from wheelchair to crutches with prosthetic legs, then a cane, then was able to walk without help. She went camping with the class having no problems on uneven terrain. I saw her again after she graduated from high school and she told me how she now drove her nephews and nieces to school. I was so proud of her and all she had overcome. This is so awesome. I'm glad that she overcame her injury and was able to drive. Had a student who was one of the most undisciplined, uncontrollable people I had ever met. He probably had several undiagnosed learning disabilities and had no regard for any kind of social norms, both in interactions with teachers and peers. He would wander the halls, barge into classes that were not his own, and attempt to engage in conversation with teachers in the middle of their lessons. He would have loud outbursts, sometimes off song, sometimes just to hear the sound of his own voice. On a few occasions, he would remove his shirt in class and lewdly rub his nipples. This is just the stuff that immediately comes to mind. Every day this kid would act out in some new, creative way. He also happened to be an extremely talented singer and performer, and last year, his junior year of high school, he auditioned for and got a role on a show on a streaming service. I'm hoping that tutoring they provide him is more effective than traditional schooling, and that he gets his behavior under control. Otherwise his success may not last long. My neighbor taught chemistry in high school for almost 10 years. In particular, she recalls a student of hers who got perfect scores on almost every test. She was a hard worker and could be seen constantly studying. Ironically, despite her being a nerd, she was pretty popular and had lots of people around her. 2 years later she failed her senior year. It was discovered she had multiple accounts of drug abuse and had run away from home. It was a huge scandal, as the school my neighbor worked in was a prestigious and highly competitive private school. To everyone's surprise, 2 years later she came back to the school. After going to rehab and therapy she was a whole different person. She repeated her senior year and managed to graduate with excellent grades. Now she's happily married after graduating from college. I'm glad she got a second chance and turned her life around. Sucker for happy endings. One of my professors is this story. She is a creative writing professor. She went and got her MFA in writing with a few guys who were writing this play. She said that they goofed off and never took their work seriously and they asked her to write with them. She figured them to be losers and turned them down. So now she's a creative writing adjunct professor, and her classmates, those guys, have their own animated series you might have heard of, South Park. I met an older woman at a bar once when I was living in Colorado. She was a classmate of Trey Parker and Matt Stone. She had some neat stories to share, like how the school guidance counselor in South Park is the exact same character as one of their teachers they had. There was a kid I grew up with who was a bully crazy kid. He was constantly in fights in elementary school. His mom was called almost every day, and he was on Ritalin 2x a day and he was still a handful. 8th grade he suddenly decided not to be a psycho. He got great grades and studied hard. Was a straight A student all through high school. My family always joked that he was so smart he would either be a supervillain or the president. He had the potential for both equally. Now he's married with kids and helps people manage their money. If you had asked me in 6th grade what his life would have been like as an adult, I would say he would be in jail for aggravated assault. LOL. I work in a delinquent youth placement. We'll call this student Bob for anonymity. Bob had problems, authority issues, substance abuse, aggression, raised in the streets in a city minority kid. Bob wasn't going to see the age of 30 if he didn't get arrested. Nothing out of the ordinary for our facility. Over months and months we get Bob doing better. SAR counselors, staff members, teachers, therapists. He's working as a student worker and making money. He earned his GED. He even enrolled in community college in his hometown. We were dang proud when he left our facility and got a part-time job between classes. Fast forward a couple months. One of our staff members does a recidivism check. Is Bob doing okay or in jail again? Bob was shot by a rival of Bob's former gang for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. He died at the hospital. He wasn't even 20 yet. Not a teacher, but I have a relevant story. You know the show Scrubs? Well, the creator of that show went to my high school, and I was a big fan of the show when it was still good, and I tracked down one of his teachers, specifically his creative writing teacher. He told me that his former student was a C student at best, and was solidly mediocre, so that's kinda funny. Not a teacher, but went to school with a guy that had a 100% average because his mom baked cookies and did other things for the teachers, and if he got anything less than 100 she would complain about it to the profs. She also had him listed for several learning disabilities, which he didn't have, just so he could take like 2 weeks to write a 1-hour test. Obviously went home and cheated. He was on some special education plan that let him take all that time. He was genuinely a really smart guy too, but his mom put too much pressure on him. He got into the best university with a full ride, flunked out first year. Since then, he's dropped out of like 4 other unis after a semester in each. He now works full time at a Tim Hortons as a cashier. It's sad, but karma is a B because his mom used to always put down other kids by saying stuff like, "You must feel really bad. Son's name got the highest average and you were only second highest. Don't worry, not everyone can win." She single-handedly probably ruined his life. Her poor son. He never had a real chance at growing up. I hope he is doing okay emotionally. There is a kid I taught in an English center here in South Korea. His name was John and it was for a debate class. John was good at debating but way too cool for school. He was in 7th grade or so and was getting to that age where he didn't give a crap. I really wish he actually tried and released his potential, but alas, wasted. Come a few years later and I run into him on the streets. I actually didn't recognize him, but he came up to me and was very excited. It was kind of surreal because he was never really excited to see me. He thanked me for teaching him debate and he had just won a national competition. I was very proud of him. Sadly, that's the only time I ever saw him again. I'm sure he's just fine. I taught at a high school. I had one student who was incredible in school. She had an awesome family, involved in clubs and was extremely shy. She was going to Brown or Princeton and wanted to be a civil engineer. Open up P-Hub the other day and I'm pretty sure she's a cam show girl. If not, this chick has a doppelganger. This is not mine, but my grandpa's. I don't know if this story counts, but I'll say it anyway. There was this child actor who needed to act like an architect in a movie he would be in. My grandpa was still teaching at the time and is an architect, so he had the kid in his class for a while to learn. That kid was Tom Cruise. Big if true. Jokes aside, props to your grandpa for helping the kid pursue his dream. If it weren't for him, it is possible that there could have been no Tom Cruise movies or Mission Impossible out there in the limelight today. Not a teacher, but had a guy a few years ahead of me in HS. Dude was the closest thing to a genius I'd ever seen. Total recall. Just absorbed information and hung onto it. He got a perfect score on the ACT and got into a pretty prestigious Midwestern University medical program. Last I heard he dropped out after developing a coke problem and can't hold a job down. Young girl. Very smart but no Einstein. They removed her from her school and put her in the center-based gifted program for the super smart. The teachers there promptly ruined her, as they did all the kids in that program. None of them were truly challenged, given a curriculum that allowed them to pick and choose what they wanted to study, which taught nothing about hard work or slogging through the difficult parts, and brainwashed all the kids, their parents, and everyone else in society were the equivalent of low IQ monkeys compared to their genius and not worth their respect. She graduated high school with high marks because they were pampered and indulged. Big college, where it's actually hard, and you actually have to study and people don't constantly praise you for being amazing. She lost her mind, couldn't keep up with the other students, didn't know how to work for grades, and convinced herself her high school BF would cheat on her if she didn't go home and be with him. She dropped a full ride scholarship in the first year. They broke up, of course, and she ended up managing a rap group that was going nowhere, fell into drugs and a bad crowd, and now works as a cashier. Coached a kid in football his freshman year. One night at a varsity game we caught him in the woman's restroom with a bottle of alcohol. He's now in the NFL. If I may ask, who is it? Of course, this is another one of those not a teacher posts, but I do think I count as a failure story. As a child, I had a knack for learning things quickly, and I was very passionate about reading and studying. Learning basically anything was exhilarating for me, and I absolutely loved school. In 5th grade I had an excellent teacher. I got on with him well and he seemed rather proud of me. He worked to get me in an advanced learning program. Last day of school he told me how he looked forward to seeing how far I would go, and went as far as saying he wouldn't be surprised at all to see me as valedictorian someday. Not long after that, my mother and stepfather both started heavily drinking. They both were exceptionally cruel to me in their own ways, and I quickly learned that nothing I did would matter to them, and that they would always see me as a failure. My self-esteem tanked. Depression settled in. The sexual abuse I suffered both before and after that time really started affecting me in strange ways. I quit caring, my grades tanked, and I was certain I would kill myself before I turned 18. So why bother? I went from an honors student to barely trying in a matter of a year or two. My sibling is 7 years younger than me, and they had the same teacher mentioned before for 6th grade homeroom. I was heavily baked 24/7 at this point in my life as a means to cope with my various problems, including then undiagnosed bipolar, and I happened to run into that teacher at my sibling's band concert. He's a smart enough man to know a stoner when he sees one, and I will never forget the look on his face when our eyes met. He looked so disappointed in me, almost crestfallen. I don't even know how to describe it, but I just knew that he knew I was basically white trash at this stage in my life. He looked so sad. He is such a kind man and I knew he genuinely believed in me and expected me to go far. Sometimes I want to find his email, share my story of abuse and mental illness, tell him how my situation and lack of mental health care swallowed me whole, try to explain to him how his star pupil could be beaten down so far. I can't imagine this will reach anyone so late in the thread, but I guess I wanted to get this off my chest. I'm doing better these days, after several years of therapy and mixing and matching drugs with my doctors, but I still wish I could have achieved even half of what this man saw in my future. Thankfully my health is improving by the year, and I am in a loving, stable marriage, but I haven't held a job in years and only barely graduated high school in a state with the second to last worst education in the nation. I do hope I can manage to go back to school and make something of the shambles my life became, and it's looking more likely as I stabilize. But that look, it'll really stick with me. Maybe someday I'll have a science degree and can find him and show him how I turned my life around. Maybe. If he was a good teacher, he understands circumstances. He knows something was happening in your life, and that's what he was heartbroken about. Not you. You're still everything he ever saw in you. Not a teacher, but I think I'd be one of those success stories. Growing up, my teachers all told my parents I'd never succeed or accomplish anything. My music teacher told my parents to take my instrument back to the store before paying too much for it since I'd never be any good. We couldn't afford private lessons. In high school, the vice principal told my mom I wouldn't even manage to graduate and was destined to drop out and end up in prison. I did graduate on time, and now I'm a prosecutor. I have no criminal record, except one minor speeding ticket. Have lived on 2 different continents, speak several languages, and am a soloist in a local orchestra. To those rare teachers who believed in me, thank you. To this day I have constant feelings of inadequacy and I'm convinced I'm going to fail everything any second. But thanks to a few people urging me on, I dare to try. To those teachers and everyone else who said I'd never succeed, frick you. You tried to destroy me and nearly succeeded. Thanks to you I spent years afraid to even talk, let alone try to do things I wanted to do. I'm happy I finally stopped letting my fears control me. Wish I could claim it, but a retired colleague of mine taught some guy who only seems to come out and sing at Christmas, but all his albums go platinum. As an adult, died in a police shootout following a manhunt for murder. I looked up his very distinctive name on a whim and there were a few articles about him. As a middle schooler, he was rude, ran a gang of bigger boys, and was a great athlete. His mom, single and never came to parent-teacher meetings, was about my age, and I was an undergrad. You do the math. Wasn't allowed on sports teams because of his grades, so I suppose could never channel that energy or get a strong authority figure. The school was in gang territory. Students dumbed themselves down to fit in. Made me think about how sometimes the odds are just so stacked against you through no fault of your own. I used to work for a company that took kids on wilderness trips for 3-4 weeks to teach them life skills, as an alternative to juvenile detention. Overall positive experience, and I really think the organization turned some kids' lives around. However, one course I instructed was the worst. Terribly behaved kids, terrible instructor team, terrible weather events. At the end, I kinda feared that the kids left worse off than they arrived. 4 months later, I was in the same area finishing another course that was 100% more successful. I was meeting with the local probation officer when one of the kids from the terrible course stopped in to see her unannounced. He needed her to sign papers because that was the day he was getting off probation. I cried on the way home, knowing that he made that happen on his own because he's a good kid, and that the course I instructed didn't frick him up. But I know that not all the students had his success. I knew this girl, good grades and both parents were doctors, who during her senior year was purchasing drugs from 2 friends and they asked her to drive them to beat a kid with a crowbar because he stole some weed from them. She did and they got caught and the 2 girls who were in the car during the beating got 8 years. Might be not fit in here, but when my dad was young he was told by one of his teachers that he wasn't smart enough to do anything but drive a dump truck. He now has a PhD in chemical engineering and does research for and with companies all over the world. I'm very proud of my dad. I think it was my great-great-grandfather on my father's side. He was the headmaster in a school in now Poland, back then Germany. He kicked as one student out of his school for document forgery, I think report cards. Anyway, forward a couple of decades and that student, Oskar Schindler, saves 1.200 Jews from the Nazis. Unfortunately it doesn't surprise me anymore, but there are lots of stories about absolutely brilliant people with bad family situations who can't afford to go to college or other career program and have to work some entry-level job to support themselves without any help. I am pretty sure uncooperative parents and a FAFSA has to do with some of the kids. I mean, it's sad for them, but it's also sad for the world because we as a society are losing out on the amazing doctors and filmmakers and teachers or whatever they would have been. My what would you do if you won the lottery dream is 1. Fund my own kids' college. 2. Pay off the house. 3. Create a scholarship program and track down some of my former students. Anyway, not that I want to imply they are failures because they aren't able to yet reach their goals, but it's surprising that we as a society educate these kids for 13 years, and then when some of the best and brightest we have to offer need to borrow a bootstrap to bring them to their full potential, they find almost nothing to help them, and we are fine with geniuses escaping abuse and sweeping the floor at the grocery store. Because reasons, I guess. Let me tell you from experience, the FAFSA will completely and utterly frick over your college prospects if you don't have a good family situation. Not sure what a K-12 teacher is, but here goes. I used to teach a girl, aged 13, who came from a very wild family. Drugs, vandalism, absenteeism among others. Not many staff predicted a great future for her as her schoolwork was being held back due to family matters. Skip forward about 25 years and I bump into this girl with her mother. We gave each other a hug and she introduced me to her mother as the only teacher I could talk to at school. She then told me she had a daughter, who was at university, about to graduate in law, aiming to be a barrister. Wow, what a cosmic change from her background. That ranks very high in my list of fantastic changes. Teacher anytime before university level. I have a kiddo right now who surprises me every day he doesn't drop out of school. Keep on truckin', I'm pulling for you. Not a teacher, but a classmate of mine, running back on our football team. I was a marching band geek and we were in the same class, so I saw basically every game of his. First team varsity his freshman year. Lightning fast, great vision, elusiveness, and a ton of raw power. First team all county, all state. By our senior year he had stacks of scholarship offers from D1 schools. Traditional blue bloods and newer powers. 2. Notre Dame, Florida, Ohio State, Alabama, LSU, Georgia, USC. Name a school they probably offered him. We were all convinced he was going to get a full ride to a big school and get drafted in the NFL before his senior year. Last I heard, he just smokes a lot of weed and works some menial job now. Such an enormous waste of talent. Not a teacher but a guy my dad went to school with. This guy was a stellar student. He had a hyper ambitious and ruthless streak even from the youngest age. He had a gift for ingratiating himself with authority figures. Also being from a very rich family, people were speculating about him as being a future president of Vietnam. This was in Saigon, South Vietnam before 1975. Fast forward many years later he is a refugee in Australia rising through the ranks of the Australian Labour Party, equivalent to the Democrats in the US, and the power brokers have huge ambitions for him. They had plans in making him a member of the upper house in NSW Parliament, state level senator, and eventually making him federal senator, national level senator. But he decided to have his political opponent assassinated. Today he sits in a prison called Supermax and is marked never to be released on his files. This is basically the opposite what you asked, but I was a student bound to fail. After a brain injury, my doctors, all 5 neurosurgeons, strongly believed I'd never make it through college. Well, I needed a lot of tutoring, stretched a 2-year degree into 5 and barely scraped by with a 2.5. But I freaking did it. I did it. I lost almost everything I was good at in that injury. I lost most of my vision, got seizures, became extremely socially retarded and unable to read body language. Still struggle, used to be a swimmer and gymnast aspiring to go to the Olympics, but now can't stand on one leg without falling. My intelligence became stunted. I became very depressed and self-absorbed. I later learned this is common with brain injuries. To have narcissistic traits but not full blown. I was fricked. I still can't work. I'm honest to God a failure in almost every aspect of life except one. I'm a dang good artist and a quick learner with making things. I'm a freaking idiot but I know my limits. I know when I can't advance. So I focused on the one thing I know I can do well, and that's art. I was good at art before but it wasn't what I specialized in. Now, with everything being taken in that accident and taking a year to relearn basic sentence structure, another 7 to be able to hold a normality conversation and a ton of gaming to get some basic hand-eye coordination down. I'm good at gaming and I'm good at drawing. I suck at a lot of things, but I'm hoping to teach art to inmates in prison so they get a second chance like I did. Someone to believe in them. I'm far from the best artist out there but I'm not terrible. I'm proud of it and it's what made me be accepted full ride into college. I have no aspirations to change the world. Led a big inspirational movement about breaking limitations because I was restricted. I pushed but I didn't beat my head against a wall on things I was physically unable to do. I'm happy being a nobody. I just want to help others get that same self-satisfaction purpose. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.